and welcome to the Loudcast with me, your host, Kevin McLean. I am still here, still in my flat and leaf, still bringing you some of the very best of spoken word. But for the first time in a long time, we are stepping outside of the flats in Leith to bring you some spoken word. That's right, we are back with live shows for the Edinburgh Fringe. We are incredibly excited. When this episode of Loudcast airs, we will already have had our first two shows on Friday just there. I'm very excited for them. We're going to have some incredible guests. We're going to be in the theatre for the first time in a long time. It's going to be wonderful. Guys, if you're a fan of Loud Poets and you're anywhere near Edinburgh, make sure to get your tickets. We'll be doing two shows every Friday night, and then we'll be doing a slam on the 28th, the Saturday, right at the end of the run. It's going to be very exciting. We're all very excited for it, and we hope you'll come along and indulge yourself in some live spoken word. It's gonna be wild. But for now, we are still here with our Loudcast, and we have an incredible guest for you, and we have some absolutely quality poetry videos. We're gonna kick things off with one of my all-time favourites. He is a huge part of what Loud Poets has done for years and years and years. We love him dearly. This is Joe with the Glasses, Jackie.
I'm going to do one more poem. It's called Jackie, and Jack's going to be accompanying me. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for showing up. I'm saying this now because after the poem, I'm going to walk off in dramatic fashion because I'm cool like that. She says, JFK is going to save me. She forgets that death is as old as the chalk of her hopscotch squares, but then again these days she forgets a lot. I was always told she wore raised fists like brass knuckles and that she loves chairs. To her they're made from the planks of slave ships with burning flags. I can tell she hates walkouts, but then again she forgets. But I can tell she remembers the fires. She remembers her father and the meatloaf and the shiny cutlery. I say, how you expect a white man to save you? She says, boy, a white man saved me a long time ago. Some of them big cats are crippled or blind. I forget. I say, just try to remember 1-4. She says, Charlie? I say, yeah, 1 for Charlie Hustle, 2-4. It's 2 for Steady Rock, remember? She says, give me some of that Marvin Gaye shit. Give me some of that Alabama don't need no word shit. Some of that Sam's cooking up some change shit. That kingdom go, kingdom come shit. I guess you too young for that we shall overcome shit. But that's the rhythm I set my pen to. That's the rhythm my ink danced to. So don't be bringing me none of your black stars. I say one day they're gonna shout Eureka in these streets. And I'm in love with Eureka, you see. I always had a thing for green hair. And Eureka, she can talk to us machines. And my grandfather, he made me. And I made her, so I must be Mazinger. I guess that makes her Eureka Z. Not like a mortal man, slow kick on the keyboard, but a destructo disc don't cut shit no more. I'm talking Dragon Ball Forte. Or was it for Trey? Or Dre? I guess we still waiting on that beatbox foreplay. As long as it's not Kai, I'm not a fight fire with fire kind of guy. I'd rather fall back from a cliff and fly. So I'm gonna start where X left off. And you, of all people, should know why. The wise fucked up. The children of his legacy, the so-called wise, fucked up. There was too much rope and too few knots. You should have tied more why knots. She says, boy, don't play with your words. Show some respect. You're young, but make sure your feet are little and your neck is long. You want to end up in that green valley, don't you? I say just try to remember 3-4. It's 3 for the forthcoming live Future Shock. Remember, there is no 4, remember. She says, I had children once, but I can't remember their names. I can't see their faces. I say you never named them. She says, I can't see their faces, but I can see into you. I see, tell me what the fuck you see. She says, remember how Macbeth saw that line of kings? I'm seeing a line of first ladies. And Hillary, she trying to break that chain, but she ain't no Jackie. She ain't seen blood like Jackie. I say, you know what I see? I see Brooklyn and Trivandrum, Sweden and America. I see Jesus and Hanuman and trolls and thunderbirds. I see a black boy dying of too much metal in his pipes. I see an Indian boy dying of too little water in his. I see a white boy not allowed to cry for his friend. I see a Native American boy giving thanks to rape. I see cities of sand and kingdoms of salt. I see angels with faces of dust and rings of ashes. I see samurais breakdancing to turntable beats as it rains basketballs. I see machine guns shooting down dragons. I see gods of stone smoking Mandelbrot sets as the fractals fill their lungs and they fade into the gaps between stars. So fucking try to remember. Dimensions, senses, heaven and hell, stories, planet, universe, cause Kendrick says entendres are gonna save us, and I believe him, so there is a force, see? She says, I seen black emperors, and you motherfuckers ain't no kings. I say, I hate you. I hate you for this hair and the skin and these lips and this nose. See, I grew up drinking, smoking, chanting shouts just like you, but my mom's, she loves people more than races sometimes, so it's hard for her. I hate you for your name and all its Zulu glory that keeps creeping into my grandfather's whispers as he dies. He's kept your name in glass bottles for so long, and now he just has to breathe. I hate you for the tears my grandmother sheds regardless. But before I leave, let me introduce you to yourself just one more time. And as black boys dream of Christmas trees, we sit in her Manhattan apartment that some child of her memory and nostalgia paints as Bed-Stuy, and we listen to mathematics.
And that was Jackie from the spectacular Joe with the Glasses, proving why he is one of the very best, and we are excited to have him back in Edinburgh. He got back here recently. It is going to be a real good time when we get him back on a stage. Then things will feel back to normal, not before. Someone who was on a stage for our very first Fringe show, like I said, happened on Friday. If you would miss that one, don't miss the others. We have Beck Sherwood. She is a core member of the LP team. We love her dearly, and this is her poem, Unlocked.
Protection in between fingers. A gift to look back to Paris, back to you and me. I need my keys to remind me of who I was, who I am, and where I belong. The start of the end. I do not know where I fit. I'm going home. Bring me the air and sun. With this, I can always find my way back. Memory. This key allows all my other keys to stay mine. Pound for the trolley. I've been paying your mortgage for 2 years already. Let's go riding. Sometimes things don't work. I could have, but I was strong enough to not.
Beck's there doing what she does best, which turns out is form. Who knew? She did one too many NaPoWriMos, and now the lady is obsessed. But we forgive her. She's very good at it. So, Fill your boots, Bex. For now, what am I doing? We have a third poetry video for you, and this is someone I miss dearly. You get used to seeing those familiar faces at the Fringe. I'm just very Fringe-based, guys. I'm very excited. But you get used to seeing them, and this is one of those dudes who's usually kicking about at Edinburgh in August for a little bit, and I didn't get to see him, so I'm getting my fill of him now. This is Ciarán Hodgers with Sex and the City and You.
Sex and the city and you. A jaundiced sun breaks down the cul-de-sac. It's a beer can for an ashtray, kind of mourning and unravelling the merry mess we made of our weekend. Thoughts drop like pennies from your tongue in a sigh. Oh, my God. I'm such a Samantha. Casual complacency bubbles like laughter, but I've never heard pleasure sound quite so much like an apology before. Stuffed into your mouth by men who mistake no for convince me, and suddenly it's not just about this anymore. Something else stirs and aches. It's steak and blowjob day. Paris runways, Ernest Hemingway, lingerie, mansplaining, slut-shaming, marriage-changing initials, rape whistles, unfair dismissals, the prefix intersectional ethics based on genitals, page 3, less female MPs, rhinoplasty, revenge porn, acid attacks, tampon tax, wage gaps, abortion rights, juice diets, pussy rights, cis privilege, and dance floors like candy stores. It's war. Marching map lines and working class crimson. It's prison. When single mums can't afford to keep kids from exploring the streets because the executive's check only affects the perfect when the sex is male. It's reciting essay answers like times tables to snuff the fuse inside rib cages because right now, kids' hearts tick like bombs warning now or never. Being schooled clever, instead of wise, left us improvising how to run a house, raise a child, or deal with stress while the walls fall and the cot rots and muscles knot like pulled elastic snapping free. But yesterday I learned the word phosphene. Phosphene. A luminous image produced from pressure on the eyeball by the finger when the lid is closed. Persistent light, in the absence of light, makes glass ceilings a little bit too transparent a metaphor now. Instead, it's two fat thumbs like thick arms draining pups behind my eyelids, pushing distant stars into view. A cosmos of cover girls who blow boys and buy beauty, assuming the duty of shepherd, sheep and dog, dictated to them by an industry that knows how conservation is just a fear of what's wild. It busies you with yardsticks, stakes to strengthen your spine like you'd wilt. They're the same canes that whip rhetoric. And when it comes to it, witch pyre kindling to play shadow puppets with the flames they'd make of you, and you roll your eyes now. Think this none of my business, but I'm not taking the piss. I've seen silence sink men whose knotted chests were too heavy to do anything else but drown. I watch women barb each other to appear the taller flower, only to be plucked and die a decoration in some man's hand. You were born to bloom. To mean no harm. But take no fucking shit. You don't do apologies. Need no permission, least of all mine. You are a bundle of nerves and volts, craving to thunder and crack. So why are you wasting your water on those who can't dance in the rain? Thank you.
And that was Ciarán Hodgers with Sex and the City and You, a spectacular piece, beautifully delivered by Ciarán. It was a pleasure to have him in at Loud Poets, what seems like a lifetime ago. But, as I mentioned last time, we are back. We have a Fringe run to do. It's going to be so exciting. So if you want to catch us in person, see an amazing performance like the one you just saw from Ciarán, then please do come and check us out. We'll be at the Scottish Storytelling Centre all month long. Wow, it's going to be amazing. But for now, I am going to be chatting about Ciarán's poem, about funding, about the literary scene, about poetry, about all those amazing things with our guest today. I am very excited to have her on. It is Alice Tarbuck. Alice, welcome to the show. How are you getting on?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be talking to you. It feels so nice to be talking to other humans, even if it is on a screen.
It's that funny thing. We obviously, I've not met you in person, and it was when you jumped on the Zoom call. It was nice to properly meet you. I think it's there's people I have had like full relationships with in the 18 months. Met, like worked together, partied ways, and never met them in person. Is it been the same for you?
Oh, absolutely. It's been a very strange way of relating to people, and I think that having been a teenager of the internet in the early 2000s really helps.
Yeah, that is. It must be maddening for people who are less internet savvy, I imagine. It's been a painful process. But obviously you started a whole new job in lockdown. One of the reasons we've got you on the show is because we're talking about Creative Scotland and sort of access to funding and all that good stuff. We are going to jump into all of that. I'm very interested to hear about your experience and all your poetry and the work you've been doing in the scene. But before we jump on all of that, I did want to check, what did you think of the piece from Ciarán Hodgers?
I loved it. It was so fun to watch spoken word. It made me feel like I was actually in the room. He's got the most sort of beautiful style of delivery. Immediately hooks you in from the first line, I think, and that is a real talent to be able to do that.
Oh, massively. It's why I sort of picked Ciarán, because obviously you're, I guess, considered more of a literary poet in the arbitrary dynamics of the poetry scene, and so I thought there's these great standout folk who but you are someone who engages with the spoken word scene and considers performance and stuff. And I think Ciarán's a very good representative of like the merging of those two worlds, where his writing is so beautiful and like so nuanced and intricate, but but he reads it so well. Because I often, describe like I had a good chat with Carly Brown when she was on the show, and she was talking about performance poems being like the performance is integral to the piece. It's not the same without it. Whereas Ciarán is someone who I would describe as more of a literary poet in the way of like his poems are still supposed to be pored over, right? Like they're better almost read in a book, but what he does is manages to add so much life to it on stage, I think. So yeah, he's a good bridge, I think.
He represents a really fascinating bridge, because you're exactly right. What I thought afterwards was, I really need to get my hands on a copy of that so that I can read it back through at my own pace. But I equally think that I am more likely to engage with it really closely because of the way that he delivers it. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that people who write primarily for the page often aren't so confident, perhaps, with feeling that their own delivery of their work can add an extra layer. Whereas I think if you are in a performance tradition, or if you work kind of across the two, you get a much better sense of what your own voice can add to people's understanding and appreciation of a work. And I think Ciarán does that beautifully.
Very much so, because he captures a thing really well, which is the pretend spontaneity. Like everything Ciarán reads, it feels like it's the first time he's reading it. You know what I mean? It feels so conversational and natural to him. Like it's a banned word on the Loudcast because our researcher did a whole PhD on it, but it feels very authentic to what he's saying. Like, and those beautiful bits of imagery he uses are so unique. They're not cliche. Like I think a lot of spoken word in pursuit of the performance or the rhythm forget to hold up the writing end of the bargain, whereas lines like that, it's a beer can for an ashtray kind of morning, just is evokes such a clear and precise image that is when you've really hit something nice.
Well, and what I really love about that is it made me think of the way the camera follows Carrie Bradshaw in the opening sequence of Sex and the City. There is a similar sense of panning at the beginning of the poem, that it kind of moves us in so that our gaze is hooked from the beginning. And I think that is a really fascinating way of relating it to the medium that is the jumping off point. I thought that was a really nice little bit of kind of conflux of style and visual style talking to each other.
I, that's bang on. I'm less familiar with the show, but I know what you're talking about, that sort of panning. I think I love that as well, because that is something that a fan of the show picks out. You know what I mean? Someone that it keeps it thematically so relevant for them, but it's a subtle touch. You don't necessarily need that understanding. I love pieces like that have, you can sort of pick into.
And I also think it's a fascinating theme for him to tackle. I think it's a really difficult position to speak from, speaking to the subject matter that is covered in the poem, and I think he does it very elegantly.
Absolutely. I'm sure you, Alice, will have been to poetry nights where there are people with the best of intentions who maybe aren't, delivering that in the best means. We've all seen those poems of someone you're like, that is not necessarily your battle to fight, right? But I think there is still something to being like an ally, and people should try and understand these things, especially, white guys. And so, like, I think there's something really nice to what Ciarán does, is he demonstrates actual understanding of the situation, because I don't think he is ostensibly speaking to a female character, but I don't think the poem is for a female audience. I think the poem shines a light on male behavior and is a subtler knife, right? It's like a way to speak to folk. I think that last line of why spend your water on people who can't dance in the rain, like, is a very clear way of like what the message of that piece is that like it's the male problem. Am I making sense, or am I talking nonsense?
No, you are making sense, because I think that poetry nights are a hotbed of performative allyship, which is often undercut by the reality of who gets stage time, who gets attention, what the criteria for judging people are. And I think it's very easy to get points as a cis male performer if you do some performative glib allyship, and I don't think that's what's happening here. I think it's very much that feeling of, well, who can I use my privilege to speak to? Well, okay, so men are going to watch my poems because I'm a white guy, like they're going to think I've got stuff that's relevant for them, so if I can get this in here somewhere, then they're going to listen, which I think is a really good use of one's platform, actually.
Totally, absolutely. It's layered in a lot of Ciarán's work and stuff, is that and it's something I really appreciate, is that the point made subtly, because I think it's something I've discussed before on the show. Again, Carly Brown comes up. She's someone that does it very well as well, of like making your point either with humor or sort of wrapped in this beautiful imagery, so that it's almost, it sinks in without the realization that a lecture is sometimes not the best way to reach everyone. And yeah, I just think Ciarán walks that difficult line very, very well.
Yeah, it's the sugared pill approach, which I think is very necessary.
Exactly. It's interesting, obviously, that one of the reasons I kind of wanted to pick that thematically as well is I know a lot of your work in the scene has been about inclusivity and, kind of stretching across those divides, right? And like making sure that people have access, that spaces are welcoming. Is that something that's like you see going kind of hand in hand with the work you do creatively?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. The work I do creatively is based largely around the premise for me that everything should be accessible without ever being condescending, patronizing, made less complicated. One of the things that I find very difficult in current accessibility discourse is this idea that everything has to operate at a kind of lowest common denominator in terms of its content in order to be made accessible. And I actually think that is not true at all. I think that it's enormously patronizing to assume that something is more accessible because it's quote unquote easy to understand. I think that access is about giving people the confidence to tackle anything, to tackle any text, to say, hey, I don't understand that, can you explain it to me? And for there to be an environment in the room where that doesn't mark that person out as any different, where that person's been able to get into the room in the first place. So I am very passionate about the idea that we can explain anything to anyone. You can expose anyone to the most complicated poetry in the world, and their response will be as valuable, as interesting, as necessary to the broader critical discourse around poetry as anyone else is, and that they should be empowered to be in a position to feel that.
That is an amazingly succinct way to put a very big point. That's bang on. I always find it maddening, like these, even referencing what we were talking about before, of like, oh, you're a literary poet or you're a spoken word poet, and like, one of the things even I harp on about is that, that the way you approach a piece is designed around the audience you're speaking to. And so I get to an extent that, like, what people, what I often refer to as, like, I try and make pieces accessible, is like understandable for the vast majority, but I never then consider those to be lesser pieces because they're not wrapped in this nuance. It's because it's a live performance. I'm speaking to someone in the moment, and so the audience there needs to literally be able to understand it as I'm saying it, but like it should still be layered, it should still mean something, it should still be presented with, like, all of that in it, and it should be respected the same way. I find it interesting that there have been a lot of articles kind of from critical reviews, like I know Holly McNish got like slammed by someone for being like, not a cultured writer, right, or whatever it was, or people go after Rupi Kaur on Instagram poetry and things like that. It does also seem to be primarily aimed at women, which is pretty nasty.
Funny that.
Yeah. What do you make of that? Because as someone who maybe comes from the more literary side of the scene, like, you don't have, you're very engaged with spoken word. Like, do you see any of that sort of where people hold it as a kind of less worthy thing than real poetry?
I think it's something I hope that is changing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have done a lot of work to help it change. And I think one of the things that has happened, not at ground level, but at the level of the academy, where whether we like it or not, things gain credibility in the broader cultural conversation, often because they have there's an established academic kind of route into them. So Katie Ailes, the researcher for this show, has done an enormous amount for spoken word through research, through this idea that it's something that is worthy of research. For example, that research should be done in this area because it's an enormously rich literary field that is only growing. And people like Holly McNish have such a high public profile that I think what has been particularly interesting for me from the point of view of spoken word, particularly gaining a sense of respectability, is a horrifying word and I don't like using it, but gaining a sense of mainstream recognition, is this idea that I think that certain topics or certain rhetorical positions or certain political positions require certain forms of approach. Like a novel has is for example an example of a literary approach that can do certain things within its shape really well. But if there's something that needs to be said in a poem, you're going to have a really hard time saying it in a novel because they're modes of oration that carry different possibilities of form. And I think what we've actually understood, hopefully increasingly, is that spoken word is its own sort of form, which contains multitudes of form, obviously, within it, but that the subjects that it tends to address, or the subjects that people think of as being kind of particularly appropriate or benefiting from spoken word delivery, it's often because you could not say those things in any other form and have them have the same effect. There is a real need for it. And on the subject of Rupi Kaur, which I know people love to have a go at a female writer for being commercially successful, I would say that I think that it is good that people are reading poetry. Like, do I own a copy of Rupi Kaur? Do I find her kind of someone I would go to in my own spare time? No, but that's fine. That doesn't mean I have a problem with her. It doesn't mean I don't think people should read her. When I was teaching creative writing at the University of Dundee, loads of my first years said that she was the only poet they had ever related to. They'd done the whole school syllabus of poetry. They'd trudged through the war poets. They'd done like 14 Carol Ann Duffy poems in short succession. And Rupi Kaur was the first person that they read and they thought, oh, this poetry's for me. And then that's a doorway, right? You can go like, great. Well, if you like Rupi Kaur, you might like Hira Lindsay Bird. You might like Holly McNish. You might like a whole bunch of other people. That's really valuable.
Oh, so massive. Like, never considered poetry. I didn't enjoy it in high school. Like, I probably look back at the poems I read in high school and appreciate them more now. But like at the time, it seemed so distant to me. Like, I think you pick up on a great thing there of like, the war poets, or these poems about like rural areas and stuff. I grew up in a new town in the 90s. Like, that doesn't mean anything to me. And so I think when I found poetry, it was through people like Scroobius Pip and Mark Grist and Shane Koizan, and like they were just doing something very different. And now I like my poetic mind is so much broader, but like if I hadn't found people who were speaking directly to what I was thinking and experiencing, I would never have like stumbled into like one of my favorite poetry books I was reading recently was Patience Agbabi. I wouldn't have ever read that had I not found like Shane Koizan doing sad fat guy love poem. You know what I mean? Like, it's just you need your gateway through. So it's I think that you make a really, really like excellent point. I think there is a wider issue within the spoken word scene that I think either from perception from the outside of that sort of, right, this is lesser, and like there is, I think that perception gets fostered by the fact that spoken word is still a fairly loose scene, right? Like, it is very grassroots, that there is, the very top of the scene is, working at the same time in conjunction with brand new people, right? There's very little separation between the professional sphere and the sort of amateur grassroots level, which is good in a lot of ways, but I think it lets people cast that stone. And one of the reasons we're so excited to have you on the show is obviously because, like, as an organisation, we've been speaking a lot to Creative Scotland over the last few years, and like we know they've been doing a huge amount of work to try and get more funding to spoken word acts and encourage people to come on board, and that has kind of culminated recently in a brand new fund, which or a reformatting. I might be describing this really badly, Alice. It's a good thing you're here. The reformatting of the sort of individual open fund to make it a more streamlined process to try and encourage people who wouldn't normally access funding to access it. Am I on the right path there?
You are absolutely on the right path.
Good.
So it's been a huge process inside Creative Scotland to revamp what is called the Open Fund for Individuals. So that's the fund that people can apply to out with, big organizations. So there's also a fund for organizations. So that's, if you were a poetry festival, you would apply through that. But if you are an individual person, you apply through the Open Fund for Individuals. And that Open Fund for Individuals has been changed in response to listening with people, user feedback. A lot of people have found applying to Creative Scotland, there's been a sense that it's quite intimidating, that, there's going to be a huge form, you're going to be asked loads of really difficult questions. And we really wanted to make the process of applying easier. So one of the main changes that people are going to see when the fund goes live, which it will have done by the time this broadcasts, is that it's now an online form that you can save as you are going along. So it's no longer a form that you download. You can now apply online and save it as you go along. You can now also, it's easier now to request support for your application. So if you have an access need, that means that it's better for you to apply in another way, so via a video recording, for example, or if you might need some support ahead of your application, we would really encourage you to get in touch with us. The literature team are very friendly, I promise. We don't bite. We would love to have conversations, and if you need a scribe for those conversations or BSL interpretation, etc., that can be arranged. So that's one of the first things that you will notice is different, that the fund is actually online. The form is online. The second thing that you'll probably notice that's different is that previously the fund application was the same no matter how much you were applying for. were some questions that were different, but now we have 3 different tiers of funding. So the way that these tiers of funding work are that they have been divided into 3 levels based on what amount of money you are asking for. So the lowest level is for applications that are between £500 and £5,000. The middle level is for applications between £5,001 and £20,000. And then the highest funding level is going to be for applications over £20,000 up to the top ask, which is £100,000. So what does that mean when you're applying? Well, it means that once you've put in the amount that you're asking for, that will determine how many questions you have to answer and how long it takes to receive a response from us. So what we're hoping is that you don't need to be spending loads of time. If you're asking for a really small amount, you don't need to be spending loads of time answering really detailed financial questions, etc., that aren't really relevant to you. So what we will hopefully do is provide an application system that reflects the level of ask that you are asking for, so that we are not asking you for more questions than you need. We are also, the third thing that you might have noticed is different is if you have applied for over £5,000 and there's anything that is missing from your application supporting documents that you can attach that we think will be really helpful for us to see in order to make an informed decision, we can contact you and ask you for those documents to support your application. And that's something that we would only do if it was something that you could reasonably already be expected to hold for the stage of project you're currently at. We wouldn't be asking you to kind of produce things you didn't have, but if we think that those documents that you would probably already have would be necessary for our decision making, then we are now able to get in touch and talk to you directly about having things sent additionally. And then the final thing that is kind of one of the final big things that's different is what's going to happen when your application is submitted. So when applications are submitted to Creative Scotland, they go to an assessor who writes an assessment of them, and that assessment is then taken forward to something that is called panel. And what panel is it's a group of specialist employees who meet, and the group changes, and the panels are held every 2 weeks, and they discuss all the applications that have come up for that panel and what's going to happen to them. And what's hopefully going to change, what Creative Scotland have planned to change with the new online application system, is that if you have asked for between £500 to £5,000, you will hear within 8 weeks of your application. And if you have asked for between £5,000 and £20,000, that will also be 8 weeks from your application. And then if it's the higher end, if it's the largest asks, so between £20,000 and £100,000, that will take 12 weeks to go through. So what we're trying to do is reflect in our response times the amount of money that you've asked for. So if you've asked for a smaller amount to do something, we would really hope to get back to you as soon as, in 8 weeks. So that's kind of hopefully going to be helpful for people. And also, as soon as you hear your decision, so if Creative Scotland say, yes, well done, you've been successful, or no, I'm really sorry, you were not successful at this time, you'll have automatic access to the assessment that your assessor has written through your online account. You won't have to ask us for it. You'll just be able to go on and look at it and see if there are any additional comments there from the funding panel. So if your application is not successful the first time, for example, you can apply one more time with the same project or activity. And the way the new system works is that you can go on and see your assessments, so see your feedback, and hopefully reapply armed with that information and able to make changes to provide perhaps the details that we felt were missing, or to tweak the application so that it is in line with some of our suggestions. And of course, that doesn't mean, as with all these things, it doesn't mean that it's going to be automatically successful, but certainly it's really helpful for taking on feedback, either to reapply or for shaping an application next time. And in fact, even if you're successful, it can be super helpful to read through that assessment and then think, okay, so next time I apply, it would be really helpful for me to break down these things in the budget, or to include the CV of my collaborator, or to expand on this section or that section a bit more. So hopefully it's going to be a little bit more straightforward. And the other thing that I would say is that for applications of up to £5,000, if you are successful, you would be given all of the money up front. And for over £5,000, it's the most normal procedure is that we would pay 90% of the funding up front and 10% once the kind of project is complete and the end of project monitoring form has been completed. So the biggest change I think that the public are going to see is that it's an online form, which I think is a really wonderful thing, and also that it's going to ask you for different levels of detail depending on the size of the application's budget. So I'm really hoping that that will make it an easier and quicker form, especially people asking for less money. And obviously, if you're asking for a huge amount of public funding, you have to demonstrate really carefully thought about public benefit. So those questions will be proportionally more complicated, or not more complicated, that's a very bad word to use, more in depth. They will ask you more questions about all of that stuff. So hopefully that's going to be a really positive change. But what I would say, I can hear the IT department in my ear saying it's an iterative process. So no huge change to a system is likely to be without hiccups. And what will be great is that once it goes live on the 10th of August, we're going to be able to see what works and see what doesn't, and then add things in if they're needed, or rejig things to reflect the user experience. But we've had test groups, and hopefully this will be an improvement in accessibility to the Open Fund for individuals.
Amazing. Alice, I'm going to have to, whenever I need to have something explained in a very precise and concise way, I'm going to have to get you to do that for me. And that's like so detailed. Amazing. Very helpful. Genuinely though, I know, I've been doing this a long time, and like trying to access funding at the beginning was very difficult for me. I had issues with it. It's only recently, we've kind of like had that more consistently, and it's because it is in depth, it is a process. And I think what the words you used when you were like, some people find it intimidating, I think that's true, and I agree with you. The literary team is lovely, like you guys are all great. I think once you know that, and there is a level of communication that the process becomes a lot clearer. I think it's I think and from that whole sort of revamp that you're saying, the changes that are being put in, it seems that a lot of that is focused on making that communication clearer both ways, right? Of like simplifying what needs to be said to Creative Scotland, and making sure that feedback is given back more readily, and that there is the chance to be like, oh, if you had this, maybe we could, that would swing it, or any of those things. Like, it just feels like that's a higher level of communication between individuals and Creative Scotland. Is obviously you are fairly new in your role as a literary officer. Is that something that's been behind the kind of idea of like making that line of communication easier?
Absolutely. And not that I think there are any particular silver linings of the pandemic, but certainly Creative Scotland's mechanisms for distributing emergency funding to individuals and organisations had to, by its very nature, be a very different sort of gateway, a very different sort of application. And I think a lot of valuable lessons have been taken from how the simplified emergency funding application produced high quality applications, and they were able to distribute a great deal of public money through those funds. And so I think that the idea of being accessible is a really complicated idea, because Creative Scotland are not gatekeepers. Public money should be in the hands of the public for all the brilliant ideas that the literary sector has. and they do. I mean, I'm lucky enough to see them on my desk every day. It's incredible. I feel like Scotland is an evolving and really vibrant scene, and it's such a pleasure to see it in real time. But I think there is a perception that when these forms ask questions that maybe we're not used to thinking about in our work, it can feel really as if a barrier has gone up. And I think sometimes people think that there is a secret funding language. And I think perhaps in the past, I can't speak to Creative Scotland because I am only a month in my job, but in the past, certainly, and certainly to other forms of funding, there has been, you were perhaps more likely to be funded by, a private fund set up by some wealthy person if you sort of communicated in their language or were doing something that they liked, and that's not Creative Scotland's job. So part of our responsibility is to make sure that whatever your background, whatever your history with applying for funding, whatever your comfort level with administrative tasks, there is a way for you to clearly state your project's contents, its benefit to you and to the public, and for us to be able to receive that information and make an informed decision with the minimum amount of faff or hassle or barriers going up. And I often think, I would encourage everyone who's ever thought of applying to the Open Fund for Individuals to contact whatever their specialism is. So for you guys, it would be the literature team. Hello. For people who are writing music, it would be the music team. Theatre, it's the theatre team. Dance, it's the dance team, etc., etc. And just have a chat, because we are used to working with this form, and you are not. So it would be great for us. We love having phone calls and email exchanges with people to talk about eligibility for projects, to talk about size and scope of projects, to talk about things that might not have been considered, that maybe someone would then be like, oh, yeah, that's fine. I can include that information. I just assumed that would be obvious. And obviously we can't read any drafts of applications or anything like that, because that would offer an unfair advantage. But we're certainly really delighted to have those initial conversations with potential applicants. Even if you then go away and think, oh, actually, that's not the right route for me, I'm not going to pursue that at this time, it's still really great for us to have spoken to you, because then we have a sense of what's happening in the world.
And it's going to give you as an individual a deeper understanding of the process, which is like the frustrating thing. It's like, it is a process, and I've been on the other end of it. Like, I get what it is like to have an application turned down, and like, you feel it personal. You put a lot of time and effort in, and that hurts. But like, Creative Scotland do have a obligation to spend money wisely. That you can't just give anyone who comes up with like a good idea. There needs to be some process. One of the things I find very encouraging is when you mentioned like video, there is like, I always felt when I was putting applications together at first, I'd never, not specifically the thing you're saying of like a specific language, but just I didn't go to university. Like I got one higher or whatever. Like, academic work is not my that sort of long form writing. I was always a creative person. I was always like a very vocal person, and I've always felt I could convince anyone of my idea if I had them in a room for 5 minutes over writing the form, and I get why the form is the way it is. But I think a lot of people who are, especially in a scene like spoken word, where it is so rooted in working class folk a lot of the time, because it's such a it's an easy thing to pick up, spoken word, because like you don't need kit or anything like that. You just kind of do it with your voice. So I think there is that kind of like, people are scared in the first instance to get into it, and I think any moves to make that, to give alternatives, like, and I know obviously you can't make it just entirely everything's a video submission, but I think for people who really need that, then it's such a good tool to have. So yeah, I my hope is that it goes very well, and like you said, it's an iterative process. So like, the best thing, if you are a spoken word artist, to make sure spoken words gets its share of the literary funding, and these sort of changes work to make it better for yourself, is like, do go and engage with Creative Scotland. Like Alice is saying there, like, please do hit them up, because the team is great. They do communicate with you. If you need any help in getting pointed towards Creative Scotland or put in touch with anyone, you need to hit us up. You can hit us up on all of our social medias or email us. There will be links where you can get us and Creative Scotland in the description below, because I do think it is important, to like that we get our fair share. And sort of on that, Alice, I was wondering, could you give a bit of a better idea of like what sort of things you can get funded? Because I know one thing that surprised me was the kind of R&D thing. I had never considered that. I thought you needed to be like putting on a show or whatever, but the sort of research and development and writing time are often things you can apply for funding for, right?
Yeah, so just to go back to your previous point, I just wanted to pick up.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
No, just we appreciate that access is a fundamental necessity, and that equality and diversity and inclusion have to be central to everything we do. And we know, for example, that there are higher proportions of people with neurodivergences in the creative industries. Things like dyslexia, other things that might make a traditional application really difficult. So you can apply in English, Gaelic or Scots, depending on what's more comfortable for you. You can have a scribe if you are dyslexic, so access needs can be met. You can have like large print, or the application can come in other languages. It can also be in a physical format if that's easier for you. And for people with specific access needs, I would just say get in touch with us, because we'd be really grateful to, we would like to respond to that, but we can't know it unless you get in touch, so please do. But your second point, what can you apply for, is a really, really great question, because I think people, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a sense, especially in the spoken word community, that you can only come to Creative Scotland if you're going to put on a huge show that's going to tour like 10 towns in Scotland, and that the theatres have already said yes, and that, that's not true at all. You can apply for time for writing. Time to write is one of the things that Creative Scotland funds. It needs to be a particular, the project needs to have some sort of shape. Unfortunately, we can't simply fund like just a year of having a lovely time and seeing what happens, much as I would love that.
I'll get my app started now.
But if you, for example, needed, we also fund editing time. So people who are like, I have a first draft of a collection, or I have a first draft of like what might end up being a collection of work that might be performed. But what I'm asking for funding for is not the performance aspect. What I'm asking for funding for actually is like, some days in my week to do that editing work before I feel that this is ready, or before I, if it were sort of page poetry or a novel, for example, before I send it to my agent or my editor. But for somebody who writes in a collective, it might be before it was ready to do some trials performances, or before it was ready to submit somewhere, or whatever it was. Creative Scotland don't only fund things with a with an already defined output. However, they do also fund things with a defined output. So so if you are thinking, well, we really need money, there's like two of us and we're going to put on this kind of two-handed spoken word show, then just get in touch with us and ask what sort of shape that funding application might take, because we would really love to hear from you. It's not only the things that you think we fund that we fund. So it's worth getting in touch.
I think as well, on a thing maybe people don't realize so much is like workshops, or like those sort of retreats and things that you can put yourself forward for that require some sort of financial backing. Like the spoken word artists, I often feel, don't know how to grab onto those opportunities as much within that are maybe more established within the literary scene. Like there's opportunities to do that. I know, not explaining myself very well at all.
No, you are. There are often. So Creative Scotland can accept applications that say, I have been, not for full-time students, so not for university fees or college fees, but if, for example, you had been selected to attend a workshop or a short course that you thought would be really, really vital to your autistic development, it's worth getting in contact to ask us if it would be eligible for an application for funding support. That's obviously a case-by-case basis. I can't say like, oh, all of this list are eligible and all of this list are not, but it's certainly worth getting in touch. Residencies is something that Creative Scotland can sometimes help with funding for. And additionally, there is an access budget, which is something that you can put in. So say you need £600 for a residency, your access budget would be separate from that. So say you needed a scribe to come with you to your residency and help you take notes for a day, that would be included in your access budget, and it wouldn't affect the brackets you were asking for. So if it was under £5,000, but the scribe or some BSL support or a ramp to make a venue accessible for a performance run would take it to £6,000, that application would still be counted as under £5,000 because that would come from the access budget. That sounds very complicated, and I fear I'm getting into like the hazy world of lingo. So please contact us to talk about access budget costs within a project, because we would love for people to make use of that. That funding is there to help access. That's both for the individual creating the work and also for the audiences to get to the work, to see the work happen, whatever that means, digitally, in person, whatever it is. So that's another thing that we'd love you to come and talk. Basically, the message here is come and talk to us, please.
I think that's a great message. I think that's such a good message. I think, like, you know, people can get put off when they don't know, you know, the people behind it, and like the whole time that we've, you know, dealt with Creative Scotland, the guys in the literary team, like, you've all just been so helpful. Like, we've never run into anyone who didn't seem to want to be putting on, you know, amazing literary projects. Like, it's I think people forget as well, you are all, you know, mostly writers or you know, performers and stuff yourself. You exist within the literary scene. You know, like, you haven't just gone from a management job into suddenly working at Creative Scotland and deciding how, you know, the merit of creative projects like that would be wild. Which is actually a nice segue, because I don't want to just have you talking about forms and all that. Like, I think Alice is totally right. Hit them up at Creative Scotland. Do talk to them, because I know our position is firmly that, like, the more spoken word artists that get funding, who build what they're doing, the better the scene is going to do overall. The more it establishes us, the more it makes us somewhere that money is well put. You know what I mean? It's the same conversation I had with Dan Abercrombie at the Storytelling Centre. You know, we worked really hard to build an audience there, and now that's a good spot for more spoken word, you know, artists to take their shows. And so, like, the scene benefits when individuals benefit. So, like, please do take the opportunity with this new fund. If you've been sitting with a project idea, something you've wanted to work on for a long time, like, there is that, you know, fund there. Like, you are as entitled to it as anyone else, and the literary team, I know, will be absolutely pleased to help you. But yeah, you are also a writer, Alice.
I am.
How has that been in lockdown? I know you had a book come out in
hasn't happened.
2020, and like, it was 2020 A Spell in the Wild came out, right?
It was October 2020 it came out.
And so I imagine you were very excited to be reading that lots of places before that went horribly wrong.
It's been fascinating. I still haven't seen it in a bookshop.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, not because bookshops aren't stocking it, I hasten to add, but because I've not been in very many bookshops.
Oh, that's going to be nice. That must be the first thing on the bucket list
nice.
when you get out.
Yeah, it was a very strange thing to launch a book in a pandemic. I'm not sure I could recommend it. But on the other hand, I got to take part in some great stuff that I might not have been able to take part in if I'd been expected to, like, get on a plane or whatever. So that's been a real highlight. And also, it's quite a lockdown book. So it, for people who are not aware of it, it's called A Spell in the Wild, A Year and 6 Centuries of Magic. And it is a year in my life practicing magic, but it is also a history of European witchcraft for the last 600 years. It's in what is hopefully an inviting and non-academically dull way. And it has a huge focus on accessibility and local environment. So finding and doing magic in your local environment and not needing specialist equipment and not needing to go to the top of the mountain or to a pristine forest or go and bathe in a mountain lake or anything. It's about recognizing the magic that is on your front door and the nature that is at your front door. And I think given that we've all been so incredibly stuck at home, hopefully that has resonated with people when they've not been able to reach the places they might more traditionally think of as beautiful nature spots.
I think it's such a, you can see very clearly through, it's, I think the first question I was asking was, does that, your want for that accessibility and things represent through your work? And I think the long answer to that question is yes. It's the whole podcast, I think that so makes sense for you that is the core tenets of the book are very much pushing that idea of openness and inclusion, bringing people in. I find it very interesting because I don't know whether it's just me and my awareness of it, but I know very recently we did some work with Sarah Grant, who has a show Spark, just won the Saboteur Awards, which is very focused on the history of witchcraft and things like that in Scotland. I know Iona Lee has written extensively about it and stuff. Do you think there is something because there are clear parallels obviously, right, between the treatment of women historically and that the witch trials and the treatment of people deemed witch, the ethos behind that is still very heavily felt today. You see in things like Me Too and things like that. Do you think that is the connection, or do you think that is just something that has always been prevalent, that is kind of there?
So there's a theory that a critic, Peg Aloe, has come up with, which is called the 7-year witch, which is that every 7 years we get interested in magic again. And it's true, but this has been going on specifically. This is the longest witchcraft resurgence we've seen since I would feel confident in saying since the 70s, 60s, 70s. And the reason for it is that when the world, so it really started being noticeable in the 2008 financial crash. And when the world swings into uncertainty, and when the world swings specifically politically to the right, people feel far less enfranchised, they feel far less safe, they feel that they cannot trust the structures of power that they have come to depend on, and therefore they return to and turn to other structures of power that welcome all marginalizations, that don't have an entry requirement of being acceptable to a government, or don't depend on money, they don't depend on anything except your own power, your own brain, your own body, your own ability to perceive. And the reason that we have seen such a marked uptick in the popular acceptance of witchcraft is because we have seen such a rapid rise of the right. I mean, we've had pandemics, we've had financial crashes, the world is quite literally on fire. Now is a time when people feel more powerless than ever, I think, and the need to tap into to connect with the world, the more than human world specifically, is very, very strong. And I think that we see it, I think it is almost always reactive, but I also think it is a return to living with, what's the right way of saying this? I'm very wary of talking about embedded historic traditions of witchcraft because, of course, none of the people who were tried for witchcraft were witches. There's no evidence that a single one of them was. Yeah. But returning to the things that we have perhaps ignored as capitalism has beckoned its shiny fingers down the road, and we've maybe turned away from, what can this plant do? How might I be a good steward for the planet? How might I look after the trees at the end of my road? How might I talk to my neighbors? How might I look after them in thought as well as action? How might I connect with the world on a spiritual as well as a practical level? And I think we're seeing an enormous return to that as the world grows more uncertain.
Yeah, I think that's a very astute assessment of it. I think it's very interesting, especially what you referenced there, that idea of the women that were murdered, as witches. There's nothing to say that they were, but obviously we know a lot of the people that were focused on for that were people who were healers or using medicines from nature and things like that, right? And you go, you see the same victimization of people who speak in favor of things that aren't in capitalist interest. Like Greta Thunberg is a prime example of how that is distilled in, like, especially a misogynistic, like when it's a female voice, or especially a neurodivergent female voice, or a young female neurodivergent voice, like the hostility towards that and the message of necessary change or a better way of doing things outwith the very consistent and awful view of the people who already, manipulate the levers of power it's clear for everyone to see. So, like, it's interesting that level of victimization still very much continues. So when it is at a peak, I see why people look to, historic examples.
And I also think it's worth saying that people reach at the moment very quickly for the witch hunt. The witch hunt metaphor. It's very fashionable at the moment, and what I would say is that privilege is intersectional, and that so often it is easier to claim that one is witch hunted than that one is the witch hunter. And I have a great suspicion of certain movements for co-opting the language of being witch hunted, when I think in fact they are exerting a great deal of positioned, located privilege to make sure that other people feel far less safe and are far more persecuted in ways that can often be literally fatal. So I think it's very important when we think about the witch hunts and the witch hunters to think about all of us really critically in terms of the intersections of our power.
Yeah. It's a fascinating subject. I advise everyone to check out the book. It's a very interesting, especially when something is so, for me, kind of comes out of nowhere. I really appreciate that insight, because it really frames the whole subject being discussed so much just now a lot more for me. That's, very, very insightful. Alice, I wish we had 2 hours instead of 1, but I can feel Mark Galley voiceless in the background screaming at me. So I am going to bring us somewhat to a close. But before we head off to the Loudcast Extra, available over on the Patreon channel, if you want to help us keep the lights on and stuff, please go and check out that. We will be chatting to Alice about more of her own work. But before we get to that, Alice, would you mind closing off the show with a poem of your own?
Not at all. It would be a pleasure. So
Amazing.
I am reading a poem that is included in Macca Unmacca, which is a collection of 12 contemporary Scottish poets, and it's edited by Ciarán Hodgers, and it is a Tapsiltiri Press publication. So this is a poem about, let me just find it, it's called Throwing the Bones, and it's from a sequence that I wrote. The sequences that I wrote for this book are all about different forms of divinatory magic. So this is called Throwing the Bones. Action at a distance is one of the possibilities of magic. Have you heard about red rain? Desert sand heaved into the sky and dropped back down. Ideally, the footnote is the solution to acidity, hungry beyond reasonable resource allocation. Just look at your wrist bones, out in the more than human humidity of Charlottesville, under the armed gaze, while I'm trying to talk about love, or wrists at least. But the text won't let that fascism slip, like a pearl stitch, like a thrown punch, like a sprained wrist. One thing being as another is a form of sideways magic. So look at where equivalence cracks, crazy paves away into they are this and we are that, and we have guns that confirm each bias in our favor. Look, I could cry real actual tears, and I bet I could get 4 contiguous tears to hold inside the dip of your wrist bone, tasty shoal of grief for you to bolt like an oyster, enigmatic aphrodisiac, that bone. Look, it's about love. It's about licking my salt out of your dips. It's about rows and rows of armed white men, faces strained against difference, arms holding guns like guns. A gun does not have the right to comparative language. Me never actually rescuing you, and being so glad anyway that the plane took off. Insurance covers the bones. Thank you.
Wow, that's what a spectacular piece, Alice. That's tremendous. The language there is so beautiful. The gun a gun doesn't isn't entitled to equivalent language. It's just wow, and I think it touches on a lot of the pieces we're talking about there. You know, especially that last part of the conversation about witch hunts and how people are focused, and the use of like language and the manipulation of it is just a fascinating piece. Thank you so much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Wonderful stuff. What a way to close off an amazing show, guys. I'm so thankful to Alice Tarbuck for joining us. Please do go and pick up a copy of her book and go and check out all the amazing work she's been doing. She does so much of it. And like she said, if you've got an idea and you're wanting to approach Creative Scotland, do hit up the literary team. They are a lovely bunch of folk and they will be more than happy to help you out. And if you need pointed in the right direction, we're also kind of lovely, hit us up too, we'll let you know. But for now, guys, thank you so much for checking it out. Come and join us on the Patreon for the Loudcast Extra. Hit like, hit subscribe, do all the wonderful things, and we will see you again next time. Alice, say goodbye.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me, Kevin.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you could hit the like button, if you could hit the subscribe button, and make sure to ring that bell icon so you don't miss any updates from us in the future. If you want to go that extra mile and support us a little further, we do have a Patreon channel with loads of exclusive goodies, and you can sign up for as little as $1 a month. We appreciate your help, guys, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.